What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch here, joined by Carolina Calvin. What's going on, Calvin?
What's up, man? How you doing?
We're here to review Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 of the original Sam Raimi trilogy, some of the first superhero movies of all time ever created, and back before the Marvel universe even started, back before these DC movies even started, even before The Dark Knight, we had Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 from Sam Raimi. Of course, Tobey Maguire played Spider-Man. But we're just going to discuss these two films, give you a quick review on both the films, and we're also going to discuss mostly the impact of the original Spider-Man trilogy as we head into next week. We should have Spider-Man Homecoming coming out, which at this moment in time is the first day of the reviews have been released, which have been fairly positive. So we'll see if they do live up to the original trilogy or not, and we'll discuss why we love the trilogy so much and what we loved and what we also didn't like. So let's just start off by starting with the performances, with the actors, and with some of the castings. I want to know what Calvin thinks and who are his favorite castings of this series.
I thought Tobey Maguire did a really good job, specifically in the first two movies. He did a really good job of showing, Peter Parker, he's awkward, and I thought he did a good job of showing the awkwardness. And even, when he became Spider-Man, the one essence of Spider-Man is when a lot of things are going down, they say that's not his favorite, he's still cracking jokes, almost talking to himself. Tobey Maguire still did that. And I think that's important to do with the Spider-Man character. It's part of who he is. And he uses that as kind of like a way to, because the guy has a crap life. So it's kind of like a way to kind of relieve stress, even when the action is going on and people are trying to kill him. And I think Tobey Maguire did a good job. I think he's very underrated as Peter. A lot of people talk about Garfield, but I think he's underrated as Peter, but just because he captures that awkwardness.
J.K. Simmons played J. Jonah Jameson, and before you even start, bro, this guy was perfectly cast. I don't think anybody ever can play this character because he literally looked like him and he sounded like him. He had the mannerisms. It was the perfect page to screen transformation you've ever seen in your entire life.
Yeah, it's one of the best castings for a comic book movie. And he was awesome. He's a douche. But then he had that energetic, he had the charisma, perfect casting. In the first movie, William Dafoe as Green Goblin, he played on that schizophrenia, insanity, because Green Goblin's insane. And he really played on the insanity, and he has some memorable lines. The one where he does capture Spider-Man, and he tells him, no matter how much good you've done, they will still hate you. And I thought that was one of the lines. Even, of course, going back, I've seen the movie multiple times. That's the one line I remember from his character in the movie, and I thought he did a really, really good job. All the characters in here, there's no one that to me you can say, oh, that character was bad. All of them, from the character play Uncle Ben, play Aunt May, Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane, James Franco as Harry Osborn. I think all of them did a really good job.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I love this cast. This is probably one of my favorite casts in any series. These are the images of the characters that come to my head because, again, this came out when I was younger, and probably not the same for you, but when I was very young, these movies came out. So they were some of the first movies I actually saw. I think Spider-Man, the first one, was the first superhero movie I saw in theaters.
Was it 2002?
2002. So I was about 6 or 7 years old at this point. So, of course,
I was 11.
Yeah, so I see Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. As good as somebody else, maybe Tom Holland will be great. I'll always see Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. I think it all centers around Tobey Maguire. Tobey Maguire is the star of this movie, and specifically in the second movie, he gives one of the best performances in a superhero movie I've ever seen because he has to balance being Spider-Man, being Peter Parker, and the movie is really about Peter Parker. There are a lot of great action scenes in the movie, but it's about Tobey Maguire and about Peter Parker's life. And the way that you said he gives that emotion off and that awkwardness, nobody else could have done that. Like the way that Tobey Maguire acts like that, he's perfect for that awkward side of Peter Parker. And that's something that, especially with the Andrew Garfield films, I thought was really missing, because let's be honest, Andrew Garfield is too good looking to be Peter Parker. He's too cool to be Peter Parker. And with Tobey Maguire, he is exactly what Peter Parker is, which is a nerdy science kid who dresses up and then be Spider-Man, and then he's cool. Like Spider-Man is the cool part of Peter Parker. Peter Parker is not necessarily a cool guy, but Spider-Man is. And you can really, the thing I love about Spider-Man, the character, which I think they really get in these two films, is, okay, we can see all the flaws in his life and how bad his life is, but we look up to him at the same time, because when he puts on the suit, he's this hero, and he's willing to give up all these parts of his life, like being with Mary Jane and having a good life and going to school and working a full-time good job where he works at like pizza place or whatever he has to do, photography. So that's what everybody really loves about Spider-Man, that they can look up to him and he gives up so much to do what he really doesn't have to do, and that's be Spider-Man. Kirsten Dunst, I think, does get, more than anyone, I would say, probably the most hate of anybody in these films. And I don't really understand why. In the first film, she's kind of like that hot chick in high school, where she's like the hottest girl in high school, and Toby or Peter is like the young, the kid that's the nerd, and he just looks at this hot chick, and that's like kind of the ideal situation for him, and he's always had a crush on her. And I think she plays that pretty well, but she never seems unlikable to me in both films, especially in the second one, where I think she's really well-rounded. The first one, she is kind of flat in the way that she's only kind of this one ideal character, but in the second one, I feel like she has real emotions, and she's all the way through really good, and she makes her own decisions. It's not just always, okay, she needs to be where Spider-Man is or be with Spider-Man. She makes her own decisions. She almost gets married to a different guy. So I think Kirsten Dunst is pretty good in that role as well. And we'll talk about some of the epic scenes that happen because of her. James Franco is probably the biggest star that ever came out of this series, I guess. A lot of people know Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, but James Franco to this day is making a lot of high-profile movies. Whether they're good or not is a different question, but Franco is a big star in movies now. He played Harry Osborn pretty good, I think, and it was interesting to see his transformation from the first film to the second. I think that was the best part of his acting overall, and it was really interesting to see how young he was looking back at these films compared to today. But I think he does a great job as Harry Osborn because of that transformation. He goes from being the villain in Spider-Man 2 to being his best friend in Spider-Man 1. That's a tough transition to be as an actor. And the two villains, like you said, you already brought up Willem Dafoe, but you said the great stuff about him. That scene in the mirror where he's talking to himself is so good. It's still one of the best villain scenes in any superhero movie. And Alfred Molina, I think, is equally as good in the second movie as Doc Ock. You brought up Rosemary Harris as Aunt May. She's very good, and she both looks like Aunt May, like what you think would look like Aunt May, and she acts the part well. She's that sweet, kind old woman. You brought up Uncle Ben, and even though he's only in a couple of the scenes, he does his job well, because the whole moral decision of Spider-Man is with great power comes great responsibility. And without Uncle Ben and what happens to Uncle Ben, you really don't have any Spider-Man, which I'll get to one of my problems with Spider-Man Homecoming in a little bit before I even see it. J.K. Simmons, you brought him up. Not much else to say. The guy is freaking hilarious, and he's perfect in that role. And those are pretty much the main guys in the film. You could also give a shout out to Joe Manganiello, who's going to be Deathstroke in the upcoming Batman film. He played Flash Thompson, but he looks totally different. So it's like really weird to see him then compared to now. But I'll give him a shout out. So those are the main actors and actresses of the film. I think it's one of the best casts ever assembled. in a trilogy or in, a superhero movie. They all play their role well. They all are expertly applied by Sam Raimi. And let's get into Sam Raimi a little bit. I'm not sure if you're a big fan of his films before Spider-Man or anything like that, but he was kind of known as this like niche kind of director where he did these like horror comedy films. And then he just got cast as the Spider-Man director and kind of came out of nowhere as this big blockbuster director. But I think he really delivered on what Spider-Man is. Do you have any thoughts on Sam Raimi?
No, I didn't really watch any of his stuff before Spider-Man, I'll be honest. But he knocked it out of the park with Spider-Man. It captures, like, you can tell they did their research and really captured Spider-Man. Obviously, it's not gonna follow the comics directly, which one of these comic book movies do. But specifically, like in Spider-Man 2, and I know it's not just him, but to capture, you look at the issue Spider-Man No More, and the shot is straight from a panel from the comic where Spider-Man has his suit in the trash can because he doesn't feel he has respect. His his life sucks and all that. And that, those moments in the movies, these are the slower moments, but these really capture Spider-Man, and it showed, we're gonna correlate this to this comic book. So we're pulling a lot of this stuff from the comic books. And I felt as though it really captured Spider-Man, not only just Spider-Man, but like New York itself. That's why so many people, especially from New York, love Spider-Man. Spider-Man is their character, and I felt as though, especially Spider-Man 2, with the train scene. And, after that, he pretty much faints and they catch him. That's one of the best scenes in any comic book movie. And not only just the fight with Doc Ock, just the emotion, that he was gonna do whatever it took to save those people. And that's what Spider-Man is. His life sucks. He can't get what he wants, but in the end, he always does what's right. He doesn't have a bunch of money. In these movies, it's more of like he uses organic web. Of course, we know in the comics is, web shooters. But outside of really that, everything else is personifies Spider-Man pretty much.
And you brought up the web shooters, which I thought we would at some point. I don't really mind it because of the fact that
they got everything else right.
That too, but it doesn't really. I mean, how is he going to be able to afford these things? You know what I mean? Like it would make sense if they're organic, because you look at his life and he can't even afford lunch. But it doesn't take away from the film at all. It actually maybe helps it in the second one because of what happens to him and he loses his powers. That part of it might have helped. In the first one, it is, if you're a big comic book fan, you might notice it right away and you might have to get used to it. But it doesn't bug me at all because everything else is so good. And like you said with Sam Raimi, I think the biggest word you brought up with these films compared to other superhero movies in the genre is emotion. There are so many scenes in these movies where it's just, there is long stretches of no action scenes.
Yep.
And those parts of the movies are some of the best parts of the movies. The Spider-Man kiss. That's the most epic scene. That's the money scene of the entire series is the kiss with Mary Jane, upside down kiss. Then you have like you said, the sky train scene. You have the confession to Aunt May, which I think is amazing. When
he had his suit in the trash can, which is
when he had his suit in the trash can. Even when he's like getting ready for the play, like these small little things are there's a lot of emotion. Or when he's talking to Mary Jane, they happen in both movies. And I love the conversations between Mary Jane and Peter Parker because they're so awkward. But there's like so much, like you're always sitting there, at least I am, and I'm like, bro, just tell her. Like, just tell her, please. Like, get it over with. Like, every time I watch it, even though I know what's going to happen, it's like, come on. Like, he's just holding it back the whole time. And you can really tell in Tobey's his performance. But Sam Raimi did a great job, like you said, personifying the character. And I think he made these films more of a drama than what we see now today. And I think that in that he really captured who Peter Parker is and who these characters are, you know, underneath of Spider-Man.
It has like your typical comic cheese in there. You just kind of see it every now and then. And it doesn't bother me because, you know, you look at the comics, especially the older ones, you see that in there. So
it's a guy wearing blue and red spandex.
Yeah, pretty much. Like the scene here in the elevator, he's talking to the guy. And the guy was talking about it looks uncomfortable. Yeah, he said it does itch a little bit and rise up in the crotch. Like, it's just an awkward scene, but it's like, you know, that seems like something that, you know, kind of that cheese that, you know, comic books, especially Spider-Man comic books, are known.
It embraces it.
Yeah. And I this new one, I just want to talk about this new one for a second. The emotion, will it be able to capture that? Because we already know Peter's life isn't as tough in Homecoming as it was in these original films. Just because, he has Tony Stark to give him all this money and stuff. In this one, he had to do shit jobs, delivering pieces, taking essentially pictures of himself to get money. See, and I think that is what's gonna hurt for me. And it could be getting good reviews, but for me, that's just so much of a part of Spider-Man. Like in Spider-Man 2, he didn't even want to take the money from his aunt. He didn't want to take the little bit of money that, even though he still took it, of course, but he didn't even want to take it. But in Homecoming, he's taking money from Iron Man. You know, Peter, he's always been this independent, and he didn't want help from other people. He didn't need it.
Yeah,
he always did things himself, and I think that is as much of a part of Spider-Man as just about anything else.
And they nailed it in the first film too, where actually Green Goblin, or Osborn at the moment, asks him if he needs any help finding a job. And Peter says, no, I like to do it myself. Something along those lines, right? And something about, you brought up Tony Stark's going to be in Spider-Man Homecoming. With both the villains in these films, if you notice, they're both father figures. Yeah. The first one, you know, they try to be a father figure in the first one, and then he turns bad. And then in the second one, he's kind of like a father figure in the same way, gives him some advice. He helps him in his love life and all that. And then he turns bad. So it will be interesting to see if they try and do something similar with Iron Man and being the father figure, which I'm sure they will try and do. But we'll see what happens with that. There's so many scenes in these films that are just like iconic in my mind. What do you think is the most iconic scene in the films? Because I think personally it's the upside down kiss.
Yeah, I will say that one. The upside down kiss is one of them. For the first movie, the mirror scene, also the scene with great power comes great responsibility. The scene where he tells him, pretty much on the rooftop, he has him, Green Goblin has him captured, and he tells him, they're gonna hate you. No matter how much good you do, they're gonna hate you. That's another very memorable scene. The one where we're just talking about the first. I'm gonna go to the second one, where he saves Mary Jane, and he saves like the trail car full of children. I thought that was. I love that scene too. Yeah. That scene is really good.
And that also comes on top of, you talked about New York. They have the two New York scenes in the first two movies. I'm not sure about the third one because I've only seen it a few times because it's not one of my favorites. But the first two, it has, of course, that scene where he has to save Mary Jane and the kids. And then they have the New Yorkers throwing stuff at him. And you got to remember that this was only 1 year after 9/11.
Yep.
So this was a huge film for New Yorkers too. Like this impacted America. And then the second film, you have the SkyTrain scene where, you know, he goes and then the people protect him from Doc Ock. So yeah, they have both the New York scenes in there.
Honestly, you could say that whole scene where, the scene where he kind of remembers, he's kind of daydreaming and deciding if he wants to continue to be Spider-Man. And he was talking to his, he was like a daydream or whatever. He was talking to his uncle. He said, he pretty much is like, I couldn't do it anymore. It's like, I am Spider-Man no more. That scene is very memorable just because that is the name of a comic book that I've read.
I think the Aunt May speech is pretty memorable.
Yeah, when he was talking, that was a really good one. I actually like the scene in the hospital with Doc Ock, and he's got like the horror scene going in there and killing everybody. I like that scene for some reason.
I like how many like different genres are fit into one movie.
Yeah.
There's like 3 different or 4 different genres. There's action, there's drama, there's comedy, and there's horror in the same movie.
Also for the first one, where when Uncle Ben dies, and you could just see the anger in his face, and I thought that was just the acting was done really well. He didn't say a word at that moment, but you see the anger in his face. Then when he finally saw the guy, it's like, I let this guy go. And you just see his face. And you know all this happens from the comics, but just to see it on the big screen, just to see the emotion from him, I thought that was another scene that was memorable in my opinion. Yeah.
So you brought up 2 things in that scene. The first thing you brought up was the acting. Okay, the face acting for Tobey is like one of the biggest parts of both of these movies, because there's a number of times where they just like close up on his face and you see like his face react to something, and I feel like that gives each scene even more stakes and emotion to each scene. And then I think if this goes into another scene, personally, one of my favorites is the fight with Green Goblin at the end.
Yeah.
And like that, I don't even know what it would be called, but they're fighting. And about these films with the emotion, we brought up the emotion in the character scenes, but there's so much emotion in the fights too. Like you could literally like feel these people getting beat the crap out of, that you can feel the punches. Like that's oftentimes you don't really feel that in the superhero films today. Like I think The Dark Knight and those movies did that pretty well too, but like you can see Spider-Man like smacking Green Goblin and Green Goblin smacking him in the face, and Spider-Man's like suit is all ripped to shreds in both movies, and you can see the wear it takes on you when you're actually in these big fights. Like it's different. I don't know. That emotion from those scenes also translates to the fights, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, because I think because he grabs Spider-Man, throws him like through a building, and then the bomb comes right behind him. The bomb like blows up in his face. I thought that scene was done really well, even for 2002. Like where at this point now we've seen way better CG, but who cares, man? That the scene, I think a lot of the visuals still hold up in my opinion.
Yeah, I was just gonna go into that. Do you think the visuals still hold up? I do see it a little bit in Spider-Man, the first one, like where he's like jumping on the roofs and he's swinging sometimes, occasionally, but like not at all in Spider-Man 2. Like I don't think I see one scene where I'm like, that looks old. Like the first one, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, I could see why some people would feel that's dated. But at the same time, you look at these scenes and a lot of them are like so iconic, or a lot of them are so like fun that you don't really care. You're like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, because they have raised the budget from the first movie to the second.
But like you have to think about when these films were made, right? Because there was X-Men and Blade before X-Men, and of course they had Batman and Robin, which was a failure in every regard. But you only really had at that point in time, you had Superman 1 and 2, and you had Batman and Batman Returns, which Batman Returns, I feel I like it. Some people don't like it, but I like it. So there's like 4 good films, and then you have Blade that came in '98, which was kind of more of a niche film. Like, it's a good film, but it doesn't really grasp the large audience because not a lot of people know who Blade is. And then in 2000, X-Men was felt as a good film, but Spider-Man is that character that goes alongside Superman and Batman. So like the first one was like this huge film. I think it made the most money of the year. I think it eclipsed every superhero movie before it. And it had one, I think it still has the first or second best origin opening of all time, which is really impressive because it's like 2002, before the age of superhero films. And these superhero films set up all the ones to come down the line because of how well they did at the box office and how iconic they are. So yeah, you got to think about that. Like, before this film, they had all the stakes on the line. They didn't even know they were going to make a second one. This isn't like the Marvel universe where they're set up for like 10 films. Okay, we're going to do this one. We're going to set up Spider-Man. We're going to set up Captain America. No, it's do or die. It's let's put Green Goblin in our first film because we need it to be really good. And, you know, we'll see if we get a second one. But it's amazing that they didn't know they were going to do 2 or 3, but they flow so well from the first one to the second one. And there's scenes from the first one that directly correspond with the second movie. Like when he's trying to crawl up the wall and he can't crawl up the wall, but he crawls up the wall in the first one. Yep. There's so many scenes like that. Or the kiss where she's kissing her new boyfriend, Jameson, but she tries to remember if that's the same as Spider-Man. Like, there's so many scenes where they correspond between the 2 movies, yet they didn't know they were going to have a second movie.
But I think around this time was when you had the resurgence of the superhero movies, because in the late 90s, up until Blade, really, because Blade, well, when that came out, a lot of people didn't see that as, they didn't know it was a comic book. They just thought like, oh, it's a cool vampire. It was a cool vampire movie.
That's the thing about those movies, right? Like Blade and even X-Men, the first couple ones, if you watch them, like I've seen them quite a few times. It's like they're really dark and they're almost like, they're not very comic booky. They're kind of like more action.
I think people knew who the X-Men were just because
they did, but it's hard to explain. But Spider-Man like full went on like campy mode. You know what I mean? Like fun mode. And X-Men and Blade are kind of darker, and just the way that they're made, especially Blade kind of has to be, but X-Men doesn't necessarily have to be. But the way that it was made, it's kind of like, it's kind of dark. It's kind of 90s action film. And Spider-Man just went in a totally different direction, which a lot of people, like for a lot of people, that was very new at the time.
Yeah. And like, not only with that, like I would say like Blade really started it. Then you had X-Men come out, and Spider-Man was that one character where he was a big name character. People knew who he was, and went kind of campy. Drew a lot of comparisons to the comics. You pull stuff from the comics. You saw different things. If you read the comics, you could correlate with the movies. And I think that was the one that really hit home, just because it's Spider-Man. Even the X-Men, they were popular, but they're not Spider-Man. Blade, people didn't know who he was. They thought it was just another vampire movie. I would say it did help the comic movies, but Spider-Man was the one where like, the comic book movies are back. They're truly back, and we can pull stuff. We can use the source material, and of course we can kind of do our own little story, but still staying true to everything that's Spider-Man for the most part.
These 2 films, if you look at them and you watch them again, they set up what the Marvel Universe was going to be. You can tell that the Marvel Universe kind of, it has its big influence from these films. You can kind of tell with the way that they're set up, the type of tone they have, the comedy in it, that sort of thing. I would say that there is more kind of drama in these 2 films and more character scenes than you would see in a Marvel film. But these 2 films, I think, set the mold and the landscape and, kind of the criteria for what a superhero movie is supposed to be, for what these Marvel movies and now I guess DC movies are supposed to be. Oh, can we talk about that scene too?
Yeah.
The way that Harry is set up as a villain.
Oh yeah, he's
set up perfectly.
Yeah, because that whole time, he hates Spider-Man. Even when Spider-Man saves him in the scene with Doc Ock and doing the experiment, and he was still pissed despite Spider-Man saving his life. And I think that definitely carried over to that next scene where he literally makes a deal with Doc Ock to, we wanted to capture Spider-Man, bring him to me, so I can finish him off. And then when he finds out that it was his ex-best friend, you can see like the emotions, like it can't be.
And then he, of course, breaks the glass. He goes in, he sees the mask. Like, he was set up perfectly. And
messed it up in the third movie.
And that one scene, I always laugh when I see this, is when Franco is like being asked, like, he saved your life. And then he's like, no, he embarrassed me by touching me. I think what these two films did that maybe no other films have been able to duplicate in a row is the arc of each character. From the first film to the second film, you see the progression of every main character in the films. Completely satisfying at the end of Spider-Man 2, because we saw Spider-Man 1. We saw the decision he had to make at the end of the film. We saw him go through all this crap in Spider-Man 2, and then he finally gets the girl at the end of Spider-Man 2. You see the progression for Harry. He's best friends with Peter. He loses Mary Jane. He loses his father. He loses all his recognition of his company, and then he finally turns to the villain. All right, so we talked about the first two films, their impact, how great they are. But if we had to say, like, looking back at Spider-Man 1 and 2 to wrap this video up, where would you place them? Obviously, it's hard to judge them now.
Two above any of them other movies. It's not even close.
Okay, but on the landscape of superhero movies,
mine.
Where do you think they are in terms of like a top 10, or where do you think they are in terms of also an impact?
Impact, they're definitely. I would have it below like the Michael. I would have it below like Superman 2 and the Michael Keaton Batman, because those go back when people didn't. Especially with the Batman one, that was the first time really seeing the Dark Knight. Before that, it was the Batman cheese, like the Adam West and all that. Until the comic, the Dark Knight really changed Batman. We didn't get to really see it on film, live action. We got to see that, and I think that was a big time game changer. That Superman 2, honestly put Blade up there. I have it below. I'll say okay. I have the Tim Burton Batman, Superman 2. I would say Spider-Man, because it's tough, because you can say Spider-Man 1 is the first one that really jump-started, helped jump-start really the resurgence of the superhero genre. In terms of impact, I would say Spider-Man 1. Then I would go Blade, and I go like Spider-Man 2, just in terms of impact. Top 5, it's in the top 5. I actually have a video. Spider-Man 2 is in my top 5. 10, and Spider-Man 1 is, if I did like a top 10, it's in the top 10. It is still, and despite all these movies being out, still one of the greatest. The 2, still one of the greatest comic book movies ever.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think Spider-Man 2 is in the top 3 for me personally. Depends on the day. I would even put it in the top 2. I would put Spider-Man 2 with the Dark Knight, and I think Logan is right underneath that.
Oh yeah.
But for impact, I think Superman and Superman 2 are first because of what they did for the genre, and of course Superman, and even you look at these films and all the different aspects they took from those ones. Batman, like you said, the first one I think has a big influence. I think Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 are right after that, and I would throw the Dark Knight in there as well in the top 5 for impact. I do feel like the Dark Knight has almost negatively impacted the genre, though.
How so?
Because a lot of films that have tried to replicate it have not been able to. So it's almost it's such a good movie that they haven't been able to replicate it
Yeah, because Dark Knight one tried it went with ultra realism. Like
Yeah, and that's the thing about the Dark Knight. Like this, I think Spider-Man 2 is a better superhero movie than the Dark Knight. But the Dark Knight is a better movie.
Yeah, just
that's how I feel about it. It's so, tough to judge.
So like it tried to be like, okay, none of these other superheroes exist. Batman is a guy in a bat suit. You don't see, he doesn't do, all the extraordinary things. Even that you see in the comic, he's just a guy in a bat suit with all with the training, and you see a lot of like, because which guy he doesn't necessarily really like some of these other comic book movies. That's why he wanted to go the ultra real route, and that's what they and Batman's one of those characters do. Yeah, Batman was one of those characters you could definitely do that with, and I think movies have tried to copy that and have failed just because it's just something you really can't duplicate. No one knew that Heath Ledger would have done that performance as the Joker, as that particular version of the Joker.
Yeah, it is interesting because then if you look at Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, people can replicate it, but for whatever reason, people have still never been able to replicate the dynamic of Peter Parker and Spider-Man and the emotion of the films, like the heart. And that's what I said to you in the DMs. I have not seen two films since these ones with as much heart as these ones. And maybe that's why I look back at them and I still smile and I still watch them and I'm still like, these are two of the greatest movies I've seen.
Yeah, it makes me want to read some of the comic books too. But even still, like, it's still really tough to find a movie that's come out in recent years that you could say capture what Spider-Man 2, like the emotion, still having the cheese in there, and then characters who change so much between of course the individual movies, because the Spider-Man movies that was it. It was no ending scene where you can say this is going to lead to another movie. There wasn't no character thrown into another movie. It was just Spider-Man. Spider-Man wasn't in the X-Men movies. He wasn't in anything else. It was just Spider-Man.
He could have died at any moment.
Yeah, you saw these characters grow in each movie, even leading up to the third, which of course we know how that flopped.
All right, I think we should leave it off right there. Thank you for joining me, Calvin.
Oh, no problem.
You want to shout out any of your stuff? I know your YouTube channel. I'm on there occasionally. You have Twitter. What's going on, bro?
You can see me on YouTube at Carolina Calvin. You can see me on Twitter at Calvin Philpott. Talk about movies, comics, video games, TV shows. Me and Mitch, MG. We usually try to get together and do the comic book stuff. Definitely.
Yeah. Hopefully we can do that a little bit more on this channel. It's mostly a sports channel, so we'll see how this video goes over. But I definitely wanted to review these films because they're two of my favorite, and I grew up with them. So thanks for taking the time out of your day to review them with me, Calvin. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, Gronk, spike that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more sports, wrestling, and hopefully movies. Thanks, guys, for watching. Peace out.